So we're talking today because we had this tragedy that just happened in DC. And you being a helicopter pilot and having expertise and also flying down that route, I just wanted to kind of talk to you about what you think could have went wrong and also the challenges that helicopter pilots who do fly that route may encounter.
Well, when you talk about accidents of any type, I was also a certified flight instructor. And one of the things we really like to home in on is what's called the Swiss cheese model. If you took a lot of pieces of Swiss cheese, they all have holes in it. But if you spin them around enough, they will all line up. So what that means is an accident typically is a series of many small things that line up at the same time. One of the first suspicions I would have, just based on my experiences with night vision goggles, that could have played a factor in it. Night vision goggles tend to limit your field of view between 40 and 60 degrees, so the head really has to be on a swivel. The other thing about night vision goggles that's a challenge is it takes about 50 hours of under the goggles before you have accurate depth perception, which could have a pilot in a helicopter call traffic out that it's actually the aircraft, when actually it's not really the aircraft because of loss of depth perception. That's one of the factors. The other factor you want to look at is when you look at a UH-60, it is the Black Hawk. It has a lot of structural pillars in it. A lot of structural pillars across the windshield, across what you call an A-pillar in a vehicle. Traffic can be hidden behind those pillars sometimes. So you really have to have your head on a swivel and pay attention. Those are just some of the factors that jump out at me immediately. And then there's a question also, if they were at the appropriate altitude. When you're flying over that area, there are routes up and down the Potomac, and the altitudes are fairly low, very low. I can tell you some of the most stressful flights I've ever taken is going into that special use airspace. It's very, very stressful because there's so much going on.
And can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit more? Because I know you said that you've actually taken that route that the pilot whose helicopter crashed has taken as well. So can you kind of just talk about the difficulties you found when you flew that route?
Well, we have flown into what's called the Eagle's Nest with Capitol PD. We would, you routinely take a VIP or take the governor to that area. And just getting into that airspace, you have to only enter at a certain point. You can't enter as though you would with a regular airplane. For example, we always had to enter at a point called Greenbelt. And then you have to follow certain landmarks, follow certain sides of the river. And meanwhile, there's other traffic going on around you because you're around a lot of airports. So you as a helicopter pilot are close to the ground, and the airplanes in that area are in their critical phase of flight, which is close to the ground. All of that is very, very problematic and busy. Some of the busiest airspace probably in the world. There's a lot of confidence in the FAA GO teams and the NTSB. They tend to be very non-political, if you would, and they're going to make decisions and call balls and strikes. So I think we need to wait for that because, we may find that there was a contributing factor regarding the tower. We may find there was some contributing factor regarding the airplane. And one other interesting thing is that the airplane was doing a circling approach, which means the airplane was doing a very unique approach to get around and maneuver to a shorter runway. All these things can play a factor in that Swiss cheese model.
And as a flight instructor, kind of talk about the expertise that it takes to handle an aircraft such as a Black Hawk and how much experience you have to do something of that nature.
Well, my aircraft was a little bit smaller than a Sikorsky Black Hawk. My aircraft was Bell 412, which is a competitor's product, and a lot of time in the Bell 429. One of the things that my mentor taught me is that no one teaches you how to fly a helicopter. You teach yourself how to fly a helicopter. The instructor's role is to make sure you don't injure yourself or injure others while you learn. So it is a perishable skill. I believe those Army pilots were actually doing a qualification at night. So they actually were homing up on their skill. So, as a CFI, it's difficult to fly a helicopter, but it's not impossible. And the helicopter is more connected to you than an airplane. Airplanes have wings and they're inherently stable. Helicopters don't have wings, so they're not inherently stable, so you feel more connected to the aircraft.
So this could have happened to any pilot. Like, do you think that is a fair statement to make, whether you have experience or not? Like, something of this nature could happen to any type of pilot?
Well, one of the things my mentor always taught me is that your best flight was never a perfect flight. And what I mean by that is there's always something that we can learn from each and every flight. It just so happened on this one, the lessons learned were learned with lives, unfortunately.
So what do you think as a pilot, especially a helicopter pilot, needs to be done kind of going forward so we can kind of avoid situations of this nature, if you feel comfortable speaking on that?
I think it'd be a little bit premature because we don't know what the errors were. We don't know what the errors were. You know, of course, there are going to be risk mitigation factors that are going to be put in place in the future going forward. But I think until we learn more of what the factors were, I think it'd be premature for us to offer clean and clear solutions at this point.
Perfect, Uncle Don. I mean, can you just talk a little bit more about, like you said, your experience as a helicopter pilot and some of the some of the challenges you've had to overcome in the air. And like you were saying too, with the depth perception, that was really interesting to me because the night vision did get brought up during the press conference, but it did kind of just get swept under the rug. So that's a major factor that especially affects your depth perception and the things around you. And when you say traffic, are you saying as in other airplanes around, that's considered traffic, right?
As in other planes around is when I refer to traffic. But what's interesting as you talk about traffic, sometimes under goggles, you actually will see traffic on the ground and you will think that's an aircraft. That is a true thing. And I'll share with you an experience that I had to help kind of paint the picture a little bit better regarding depth of perception. I was flying out of Georgetown, Delaware. There's a military base called Dover Air Force Base that is a full one county away, if not 35, 40 miles. We took off my first night under goggles. I flipped the goggles down. I look at my instructor and I said, traffic, traffic, traffic. And he goes, Don, calm down. That's an airplane at Dover Air Force Base, 40 miles away. That's how your depth perception is affected when you're using goggles or you're new. Additionally, aircraft can approach you. Targets can approach you from your peripheral. Your head has to be on a swivel. You have to be on a swivel. And again, the misidentification of an aircraft, you tell the tower, I have traffic in sight. You may not have traffic in sight. You may have a piece of traffic, but not what they called. Other challenges with flying helicopters is, helicopters have lower minimums. They don't have the same minimums as aircraft. Helicopters can land anywhere. Helicopters can fundamentally, depending upon the airspace, approach from any direction into an airport. Things like that can cause problems with other traffic. And then you have factors like weather. Now, weather wasn't a factor last night, but weather is probably the number one killer in helicopter accidents is weather. And again, people will blame weather as the factor. I still blame aeronautical decision making as the factor in many cases when weather gets you.
And that is a great point you just brought up, especially with the fact that you said that it takes a lot to fly helicopters. So you were saying that these pilots were going to get qualifications, their night qualifications.
They were on a training mission.
They were on a training mission. So how often do you have to kind of re-hone your skills as a helicopter pilot?
Some of that is, we're talking about a military thing now. So that's a little bit different. Their rule set is different. Their qualifications are different. Different units may have different qualifications. Now, this particular group here was the best of the best. These are the guys flying out of Fort Belvoir, flying VIPs in and out of the Pentagon and things like that. So I find that to be very, very ironic. I don't know what their qualification was in terms of being on the goggles, but typical qualifications in units have to do with 30 days or 90-day intervals. But if you're flying every day, if you're flying every night, you're probably on the goggles every night. That was a regional jet. So the information I have that the regional jet was initially set up for an approach in the runway 1. But he got a circling approach, which changes everything in traffic and everybody's moving. And I think he was trying to move to runway 33. So now we have an aircraft that's coming in on an approach. I don't know if he was stabilized on the approach or not. That I don't know. But he was asked to do a circling approach. Meanwhile, while all of this is going on, perpendicular to the runways, you have the Potomac. You have low altitude aircraft. I mean, we have things that weren't even talked about that are risk factors, may not in this accident, but what's called wake turbulence. Wake turbulence are the vortices that come off of the wings of large aircraft and can rain down on smaller aircraft like helicopters. So that's very, very dangerous airspace, busy airspace. And that's why that airspace actually requires special training before you can actually fly in it. You can have a pilot's license. And if you don't have the special training for that area, that area that the crash happened, you can't fly in it.